Ruth chapter 4. And I want you to pretend that you're an ordinary field worker. And you live in Bethlehem, and it's in the days of the judges, and more particular, it's in the time of Ruth. And I want to ask you, what events do you think that you would have just recently observed? Well, first, you would have seen two women walk into town. One who was obviously a foreigner. As it turns out, she was a Moabitess. And another woman who was a local. She was a little older. And now she is going around describing herself as an embittered woman. A woman that it seemed, at least to her, that God delighted in tormenting. It was clear that she had nothing except the younger widow, the Moabite widow, Ruth. That's all she was left with in life. Then you would have been surprised by two things. The first thing is how hard this young Moabite widow worked in the fields. And the second thing you would have noticed is that the country squire Boaz seemed to be paying particular attention to the part of the field where Ruth, this young Moabite widow, was working. Some weeks later, if you were again paying attention, you may have been on your way back to town after harvesting all day, and if your eyes were sharp, you might have noticed that there was that young Moabite widow heading out of town. She was going the wrong way as you were heading into town, and now it's getting late and the light is low. You would have been concerned about her unless you knew that Boaz was in the fields, and then you would know that she would be safe. And now, you're on your way back out to the fields, and you pass the city gate. You're getting ready to go to work for the day, and you notice that at the gate there's a crowd that's gathered. And you take a closer look, and you notice that the elders are there. And then in the middle of this crowd, including the elders, you would see a man who happens to be Boaz, and then there's another man, and they're standing in the middle of them. And they're surrounded by the townspeople who are by now pressing in to see if they can hear exactly what is happening. And what you have here in Ruth chapter 4 is a fascinating legal drama that unfolds. And what one writer said is the transcript for the court that happened that day at the city gate in Bethlehem. This is Act 4, chapter 4 of the book of Ruth, happily forever after. So it begins with the litigation. Again, this is a court scene. It's taking place at the city gate. You would have noticed it if you were going out to work that day. There's the crowd that's gathered. And something is taking place that is out of the ordinary. This is the time of day when you're going to work. You're not stopping to gather at the city gate. Beginning with the litigation in the first 6 verses, you'll notice that it says, meanwhile, what meanwhile is referring back to chapter 3. If you remember, just the night before, Naomi had gone out to the place where they would be threshing the wheat and storing the wheat for overnight, and she brazenly, it appears, proposed to Boaz. Ruth did. I know, I get those names goofed up all the time. I have to just be careful. Ruth goes out and she proposes to Boaz. And Boaz says, hey, I'd love to take you up on your proposal, but there's somebody closer in the family that can redeem you. But I promise that I'll take care of business. Stay here for the night, and in the morning we'll get on with it. And so Ruth spends the night, and in the morning, Boaz loads her up with a bunch of grain and sends her home and says, here, I don't want Naomi, your mother-in-law, to be empty anymore. This is a promise for the coming days. Take it back to her and share it with her. And so that's exactly what Ruth does. She goes back and she tells her everything that happened the night before. And meanwhile, while Ruth is telling Naomi in the morning what has happened, Boaz wastes no time as a man of action, and he goes to the city gate. Look what it says. Meanwhile, Boaz went to the town gate, and he sat down there, just as the guardian redeemer he had mentioned came along. Now, the town gate is probably the most important place in the entire town. It's the place where the community events take place. It's a place of military strategies. It's a place where the elders of the church get together to decide on court rulings. Here today, they're just there to witness what Boaz has called them to witness. And I think it's very interesting in this very first verse that we have one of those situations that appear to be another, in the book, divine coincidence. It just so happened that as Boaz went out to the city gate and sat down, that the guy that he was talking about the night before, that kinsman redeemer who was closer to Naomi than he was, happens to pass by just at the time when he's sitting down. God orchestrated a situation where Boaz goes out to take care of business, and just as he sits down at the city gate, the guy that he wants to talk to passes by. And this is what he says. Hey, you. And this is in the language, in the Hebrew language, how it would sort of read. It says, hey, you, Mr. So-and-so, why don't you come over here and sit down? When it says, come over here, my friend, literally in Hebrew, it calls him Mr. So-and-so. Hey, Mr. So-and-so. One commentator called him Mr. X. His name is not given in the story, and that's a clue about this character. Boaz says, hey, friend, and there's no warmth here. Hey, Mr. So-and-so, come over here and sit down. And so he came over and he sat down, and this court proceeding begins to unfold. It's interesting that he's not mentioned by name. He's the only character in the book that we know of that's not mentioned by name, and it could be so that his own character is diminished in the story that the narrator is telling us. It could be that his character is being contrasted, and that's where I lean, it's being contrasted with that of Boaz. This man, before we ever get to know him, is only identified as Mr. So-and-so, and the writer is contrasting his character, his outlook on life, with that of Boaz, the main character of the story, the main male character of the story. And the fact that he's not named seems to be a commentary on this guy. If everyone else is named, why is he not named? There must be a reason. And so he comes over and he sits down. Verse 2. Boaz then took 10 elders of the town. Now, that number 10 is interesting. In later tradition, in order for a town to establish a synagogue, you had to have 10 Jewish men. Here they're elders, which simply means bearded ones. So it means old guys with beards who are wise enough to judge. He gets the elders of the town together and he tells them, hey, you sit here. So he tells Mr. So-and-so to sit here, 10 elders. Hey, you guys sit here, and they do so. Verse 3. And then he begins his first topic. The first thing on his legal argument, the first thing on the docket is Naomi's land. And Boaz is so slick in how he goes about this, okay? So he's making an argument. Think of it as a legal setting. Instead of these 10 elders judging the case, they're actually the witnesses in the case. Then he said to Mr. So-and-so, the guardian redeemer, not mentioned still, hey, Naomi, who has come back from Moab, is selling a piece of land that belonged to our relative Elimelech. It's not that Naomi owns it. Obviously, at this time, the land has passed from Elimelech's family to somebody else, probably from chapter 1. Remember when Elimelech packed up his family and left and went to Moab because there was a famine. At that time, Elimelech probably sold the land. And so now, in the process of the day, according to how it was supposed to work with this kinsman redeemer, this relation, this person of relationship with you and your family who would now redeem something back, it was up to him to redeem this land, to purchase back the right to harvest on that land. So that's what Boaz is saying. He said, hey, our family member, Naomi, the widow, she's come back. Her husband was Elimelech, and now she's selling some land. This is the right of redemption that God made in the provision in the law for families to continue to be able to harvest on the land. It says something really beautiful about God, that even when you make bad decisions and you find yourself without the ability to be able to provide for yourself in some way or fashion, that God has provided a ways and means that you don't have to stay there. You don't have to live with the mistakes of your past. There's a way that you can be redeemed. And that's what the kinsman redeemer is all about. So Boaz said, hey, look, Naomi's come back. This was her land. She's selling it. It's up to you. Are you willing? It's your responsibility to redeem it so that her family can live on that land, harvest that land, and that would be a promise for the life of future generations. Verse 4. And this is so smooth. I thought I should bring the matter to your attention and suggest that you buy it in the presence of these seated here and in the presence of the elders of my people. In other words, I've got all these people together and I just want to bring it to your attention. And I might suggest that this might be something that you would be interested in. There's a piece of land that's being sold. Would you be interested in buying that piece of land? And then he goes on to say, if you will redeem it, do so. And what Boaz is doing here is he's making sure that one way or the other, that Ruth and Naomi are taken care of. I'm asking you, will you redeem this land? If you will not, tell me so that I will know, for no one has the right to do it except you. This guy has the right of first refusal. He's a closer relative. And then I'm next in line. So right here, Boaz, he knows what he's doing. He gets the guy sold on the land. Here's a guy. He comes and sits down. Mr. So-and-so, we don't know his name. Apparently he has no clue what's going on with Naomi and Ruth. Boaz introduces him to the plight of Naomi. She has some land. She's selling it. It's up to you. Do you want to buy it? Hey, there's some land. You can harvest on this land. You want to buy it? And the guy wastes no time. He immediately agrees to redeem the property. As a matter of fact, his reply in Hebrew is emphatic. He says, I will redeem it. Literally, it says, I will redeem it. They double it up in Hebrew to say, oh, yeah, man, absolutely. You got that right. There's some land. I want to buy it. I'll buy it. Apparently, he thought there was some benefit in it for him. And so this guy's saying, hey, absolutely, I'll buy the land. But Boaz has set him up, and the poor guy doesn't know what's about to hit him. He doesn't know what's coming down the pike. Hey, there's some good land over there. You want to buy it? Sure, man, I'll buy the land. And he's thinking dollar signs in his head. And all of a sudden, Boaz then, he drops the bomb. Hey, there's another part to this deal, okay? If you accept the first part, you got to accept the second part. This is a brilliant legal argument that Boaz lays out here. On the day that you buy the land from Naomi, you also acquire Ruth, the Moabite. And so right here, the law of Levirate marriage comes in. You have to not only buy the land, but on the day that you buy the land, you also acquire Ruth. And by the way, you know that if Ruth is in on the deal, then Naomi has to be, because Ruth doesn't do anything without taking care of Naomi, right? So the day you buy the land, you also acquire Ruth, the Moabite, the dead man's widow, so that, or in order to, maintain the name of the dead and his property. In other words, this whole deal comes with a built-in family. you not only get a bride out of this, but then you get a son that you have to produce with this bride to carry on the family name. And oh yeah, by the way, you get a cranky mother-in-law to go along with it. You get the land, man, but then you get a family. And I think his response was a little bit more of a knee-jerk reaction rather than a careful deliberation. He's the closest relative, and he has no clue. According to the text, he has no clue what has been going on with Ruth and Naomi. He doesn't care enough to know. He's the closest relative, and he's taken absolutely no time to find out what's going on with them. And by the way, Bethlehem is not a big town. He would have been aware that they would have come back, but it seems as though he purposefully only cared for his own. And the next verse absolutely proves that. I want you to notice something. I want you to look at how many times at the end of verse 4 and verse 6 that he uses either I or my. If we go back to verse 4, just at the end, he says, I will, remember, I will redeem it, he said. Then verse 6, at this the guardian redeemer said, Mr. So-and-so said, then if Ruth and Naomi and a child and all this other baggage come with it, then I cannot redeem it because I might endanger my own estate. You redeem it yourself. I cannot do it. 6 times in a sentence and a half. Well, 2 sentences. He uses the word I or my. And to be fair with him, we really don't know what his financial situation is. But I don't think that's in the interest of the narrator of the story. They're simply painting a picture of this guy. If you stick to the storyline then, what you find out is, what he is saying here is, hey, their problem is not my problem. Their concern is not my concern. You see, I'm concerned with my own business. If I can get the land and I can make a profit off of it, I'll take it. But I'm not going to take it if it comes with all of these other entanglements. I don't care enough about these 2 women who can't provide for themselves to, for a moment, put myself out for on their behalf. And you wonder why this guy is never named in the book. Selfish people don't leave a good legacy. He's not named. We don't know who he is. Why? Because selfish people don't leave a good legacy. If you make your life all about yourself, if you make your world only about you, you live in a very small world populated by one. If you're going to be greedy, if you're going to be stingy, you're going to come to nothing. As a matter of fact, I love Psalm 37. It says this, generous gets it all in the end. Stingy gets cut off at the pass. In other words, if you're generous, you have a bright future in front of you. But if you're stingy, you have no future whatsoever. I think it's interesting that becomes very important over time. It's already important at this time. But as time goes on, it gets more and more important in the history of Israel. So much so that a saying in the New Testament develops about being either generous or stingy, and we completely misunderstand it when we read it today. This is how serious it is. Jesus says at one point, listen, if your eye is dark, your whole body's darkened. But if your eye is full of light, then it enlightens the whole person. He's not talking about what so many have said about whatever you take in through your eye gate, it's either going to darken or lighten you. That is a well-known saying of the day. And this is what it means. If your eye is dark, you're stingy. And it will affect every area of your life, and it will be evident. But if you're generous, your eye is light, it also will pervade everything about who you are, and everyone will know that you are a good and a generous person. And if you give, God will give you so much more than you can ever imagine. You can shake it, you can press it down, it won't stop from overflowing. God will give to you like you can't believe if you will only take the time to be concerned about somebody else, not be stingy, and be generous. Here, we have that same picture being played out of a Mr. So-and-so who leaves absolutely no legacy whatsoever simply because he's only concerned about himself. What a contrast this is with Mr. Boaz in the story, right? And so we see that picture of this guy who says, absolutely no. If it's going to affect me, no. In a negative way, I don't want anything to do with it. And so they proceed then with the negotiation, and this is scene 2. Verse 7, now in earlier times in Israel, for the redemption and transfer of property to become final, one party took off his sandal and he gave it to the other. This was the method of legalizing transactions in Israel. Now originally, where this comes from is Deuteronomy chapter 25. And if this happened to you, or if you did this, it was actually a shame. By this time, everything is completely changed. It has devolved into a legal action. But when it was originally established, this process of taking off of one's shoe was actually a public shaming. And what would happen is, you would do something like this. You would call the elders of the city together and have them as witnesses. And no doubt because the gate is such a public place that other people would gather at the gate to watch the proceedings. If you were the kinsman redeemer and you were presented with the option to take care of a widow, to provide her with a son in place of her dead husband, and you refused to take care of her, she herself would go to you and take off your sandal and spit in your face and say, now in our midst, your family will be known as the family of the unsandaled. Now that doesn't sound like a big deal to us, but to them it was completely a huge deal. That was a public shaming, saying, you don't care enough about other family members even to consider them. Rather, you're so stingy, you only care about yourself. You see, because if you had a sandal on, it was a sign that wherever your feet would walk, you owned that land. Remember Abraham? Isn't that what God said to Abraham? Hey, listen, go to a land that I'm going to show you. And don't worry about anything. Just go over there, and wherever you walk, I'm going to give you that land. Wherever your foot shall trod, I'll give you that land. And Abraham walked out the dimensions of the land that God would eventually give to Israel. Now, the truth is, God has never fully given all of that land where Abraham walked to them. So there's something in the future yet for Israel concerning the land. It's only a small sliver of all of the land that Abraham actually walked. So to be the family of the unsandaled meant you had absolutely no right to the land whatsoever. And to the people of that day, the land was completely important because it symbolized your ability to be able to provide for your family. So this was a public shaming. Here, in the days of the judges, it has devolved into a simple way to make a transaction happen in public. It's like, here, don't even bother with shaming me. I'm just going to take off my own sandal and I'm going to give it to you. And in doing so, I'm passing the right to you to go ahead and do this because there is no way I'm going to do it on behalf of somebody else. Because I'm only Mr. So-and-so. That may be true, but I'll tell you what, I'm going to take care of my own. I don't care what happens. I'm just going to make sure that my own have what they need, that I can rest at night. I'm good with all that. I don't need to be bothered with somebody else's problem. I'm just going to live for myself. You see, he was doing what was right in his own eyes. I think that's pretty prevalent today in our culture. 3,200 years later, it's still applicable in our lives. Not only that, in those days when there was no actual legal documentation recording the cases, this was a graphic reminder with witnesses of what you had done. You will remember, you took off your sandal. You were the one that gave it away. It wasn't even taken from you. You didn't even give us the right as a community to shame you for not living up to your responsibility. No, you willingly took shame upon yourself. You took off your sandal and you just gave it away only for your immediate concerns, with no concern for everyone else, no concern for our community, no concern for a widow, no concern for her family members on down the line. Do you see the contrast that the author is drawing between this man and Boaz? This guy doesn't have a name, but we're going to see a lot more about Boaz and what the town actually pronounce over this man Boaz and his soon-to-be newfound family. So the guy takes off his sandal. Boaz knows what this means. He's giving over his rights. And so Boaz proceeds to solemnize the deal. Verse 9. Then Boaz announced to the elders and all the people, today you are witnesses that I have bought from Naomi all the property of Elimelech and his sons, Chilion and Mahlon. Remember, they died in the first chapter, all three of those guys. I have also acquired Ruth the Moabite, Mahlon's widow, as a wife. He is not buying her as if she is property. He is redeeming her so that he can give her a son, so that that family line will live on. So it's not like he's purchasing a piece of property that so many have made this out to be. He's buying the land, but he's also redeeming this woman that comes with the land as part of the deal. So I have also acquired Ruth the Moabite, Mahlon's widow, as my wife. I'm buying her back from her poverty, in other words, in order to maintain the name of the dead with his property, so that his name will not disappear from among his family or from his hometown, so that Mahlon's family will continue to be established in the town, so that in his family line, they can still have a part in the community that he grew up in, so that his name will continue, both in his town and with his family. I'm providing for them what they couldn't provide for themselves. And then he says, today, you are witnesses to all of this. Do you see what Boaz cares about? Do you see the contrast between him and Mr. So-and-so? Boaz not only cares about doing things the right way. I mean, he loved Ruth. But he wouldn't go around God's plan. He had to go to the closer kinsman redeemer. And so that's what he did. He took a risk to do things God's way. He loved her and he could have taken her. And Mr. So-and-so wouldn't have cared one bit, but Boaz cared. He cared about doing things God's way. That's his character. The other guy only did what was right in his own eyes. Boaz did what was right in God's eyes. Boaz approached the other nearer kinsman and made the property and the people for redemption available. He not only did that, but he also cared about Ruth and Naomi to make sure that they were taken care of. And so he carefully worded his argument in this court proceeding to ensure that they would indeed be taken care of. If you won't do it and you're first in line, I will do it. And he did it before witnesses, making an oath to the town that I'm going to take care of these women, no matter what it cost me. And it goes even a step further if you stop and think about it for a minute. He even cares about the guys that have passed away in his family. Elimelech, Mahlon, Chilion. His concern is their concern. He cares about what they would have cared about. As men departing this life, they would realize the situation that their own wives would have been left in, and they were powerless to help them. Boaz steps up and says, listen, I'm going to do things God's way. I'm going to care for these women, even though technically I don't have to. I'm going to. I'm going to do things God's way. I'm going to care for them, and I'm even going to care for people who've passed away to make sure that their family lives on, that their widows are provided for. That's what I'm going to do. That's the kind of character that Boaz displays in the story. He cares about their legacy. He wants to leave something for somebody else. At this point, it's not that he's concerned about himself. He's concerned about somebody else, so that their name wouldn't disappear. His name, if he's a bachelor at this point, may or may not disappear. It depends on if he would take a wife and have a child, a son, namely. That's not the issue here. The issue here is, will he take care of these women? Will he do it God's way? Will he care about what those other men in his family cared about? Carrying on the legacy. Will he live up to his responsibility? And it's such a contrast with Mr. So-and-so. We may not grasp the weight of the importance of what has just transpired here, but the people in the town at the city gate on that day fully realize what Boaz has done. This is life and death to the community, what he's doing here. And so they offer 3 benedictions right off the bat. Once he solemnizes this, fine, you won't do it. Okay, I'm going to do it. I'm going to take care of them. I'm doing it God's way. I'm going to care for these women. I'm even going to care for the men that have passed on. I'm going to leave them a legitimate heir so that in this town, their family won't be forgotten. They will live on, and I'm glad to take part in it. This first son won't even bear my name. It'll bear the name of another man, but you know what? I'm willing to take that risk. I'll take on that responsibility. And so the elders, they see this, and this is what they say. Not only the elders, but all of the people. Verse 11. Then the elders and all of the people at the gate said, hey, we're witnesses. First benediction. May the Lord make the woman who is coming into your home like Rachel and Leah, who together build up the family of Israel. In other words, may the intention of the Levirate marriage be fulfilled in you, so that you have a son and continue to build up the house of Israel. Remember Rachel and Leah, Jacob's wives. Jacob, whose name was changed to Israel. They were the ones that provided the sons along with their handmaidens for the house of Israel. It was their 12 sons that then formed the tribes of Israel. Therefore, it can be said of these women, Rachel and Leah, that they built up the house of Israel. As a matter of fact, to build a house, to have a child, is to build a house in Hebrew. Bana is the Hebrew word. It means to build. When you have a child, you're building up the house so that your name can be continued. May your name be built up, just like Rachel and Leah build up the house of Israel. May the Levirate marriage be fulfilled. May you have a son to carry on Mahlon's name in your family. First benediction. Second, may you have standing in Ephratah and be famous in Bethlehem through the offspring the Lord gives you by this young woman. Again, a benediction to Boaz. Not that Mahlon's name would be forgotten, but that alongside Mahlon's name would also be Boaz's name, and they would be famous in this town for the remainder of Israel's history. That the family would live on, that the family would continue to prosper, and that his name would also continue in Israel. Not that his name would be supplanted by Mahlon, but that now Boaz would also be listed in this awesome genealogy within the chronicles of the town, within the chronicles of his family, and that his name would become famous, that he would have a great name in the history, in the genealogical charts of the people, because of what he is doing this day. They recognize the magnitude, the importance of carrying on the family name, the family line. It's life and death for the rest of the community. Everybody plays a part. Don't you know that that plays over into the church? Every person plays a part. Every person is of equal importance. It doesn't matter if you're in the front or if you're in the kitchen. It doesn't matter if you're upstairs or if you're in the basement, which, by the way, I love those little plays, you know, church basement ladies. Yeah, they gripe and complain, but they're really the motor that makes everything go, right? They're jealous of everybody else, but without them, people up front wouldn't get off the ground. They couldn't take 2 steps up because everybody is important. And so they recognize this and they say, hey, Boaz, may your name be great, right along with Mahlon. Yeah, hey, this is Mahlon's family, but you know what? It was Boaz that made it all happen. May you have a name that's great. May you be renowned in the history of your people simply because you were generous and you cared about somebody else. Imagine that. Imagine if the church really cared about other people. We would be full if we cared this much about other people. And so, we got some business to take care of, I think. And we're going to do it. Third benediction. May your family be like that of Perez, not Tony. May your family be like that of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah. Which, by the way, that was also a Levirate marriage, and it happened under terrible circumstances, and they were completely immoral. Just the opposite of what happens with Boaz and Ruth. They do everything above board pretty much. I mean, it's a little questionable. Here's this girl. She goes and she uncovers Boaz's feet. Right, she probably uncovered his legs. Wrong, she probably uncovered even more than that, so that it looked like maybe in being drunk and being full, maybe not drunk, but full of wine, at least in his belly, he wakes up in the middle of the night and there's a girl laying by him and he's saying, what just happened here? Put all that aside. Nothing immoral happened. Just the opposite. But yet they pronounce this benediction, remembering their ancestors that ultimately gave them life. And they say, may your family be like that of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah. In other words, have Mahlon's heir. But then go back home and have a bunch more kids of your own. Yeah, build up his family, and then build up your family too. Just like your great-great-great-grandfather Perez did. He was the firstborn. He was the one under Judah, his father, whom your line Boaz was established under. This is a family trait. This is something that is incumbent upon you. Hey, go home, have Mahlon's son, build up his family, but then you go home and have a bunch of kids of your own so that your name will be great, so that things will happen in your life that will absolutely astound you. And listen, if they would have lived long enough, things would have happened to them in their family line that they could have never imagined. Things would have been so great. I mean, their line, as it turns out, was greater than the line of Perez in the end. It was bigger than the family of Perez because from their union, that's going to take place, and we're going to read about it here in a second, comes the greatest king of all of Israel, King David. If they would have lived long enough, they could have seen a house established that was greater than the house of Perez. God was orchestrating in all of this a comeback that was absolutely incredible. And the people witnessed this. And so you know what they're saying here. As they see this scene unfold, as they pronounce these benedictions, what they're really saying is this. They're saying that our God, we have evidence. We're watching this unfold. Our God orchestrates comebacks like nobody's business. He can do miracles in the lives of people who have no reason to believe that anything is ever going to be any different for them. 2 widows, unable to really care for themselves. One's young enough and willing to work, and so she does. She takes on the role of the lowest of all servants. And now, look what God has done. She could have expected, as a widow woman, that would be her permanent lot in this life. But God all along was working behind the scenes, doing miracle after miracle. It just so happened that Boaz, as he sat down, that the guy that he was wanting to talk to passed by the gate at that very moment. Imagine, God was orchestrating human history in such a fashion that it looked like coincidence, but it was really divine intervention to make things happen so that behind the scenes, God could work to orchestrate a miracle in the life of somebody that never expected any more of life than that. Have you ever found yourself in that place? You've thrown your arms up in the air and you say, nothing is ever going to be any different for me. I know it. I cannot see my way out. It just may be that God is using your circumstances to orchestrate for you a comeback. And the people recognize that that's what's happening in the story. And they're saying, our God is greater than your circumstance. If He did it for our ancestors, Rachel and Leah, if He did it for Tamar and Judah, if He did it for them, and build up a house, He'll do it for you too. Do you see the magnitude of what these people realized was happening? We sometimes are so detached from the Bible and the story and the history and the culture of the day that we read over this and we miss so much that is impactful there. That's what they're saying. Our God is working through all of this in people's lives who have essentially no hope of things being any different, and He's orchestrating miracles, and He's going to turn things around, and He's going to do it in such a way that if they knew the outcome of it all, they would have said, I would have never guessed in a million years that that would have happened. And He's using ordinary people to do it because He's an extraordinary God. There's no God like Him. And the people are recognizing all of that in this story. And if you don't believe me, let's look at scene 3, generations. And so Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife. Proof positive. A Moabite woman outside of the covenant people of God who becomes a childless widow, who becomes a low migrant worker, who becomes a lady in waiting, who now becomes the wife of a prominent man in Bethlehem, the house of bread, the place where God is providing. Imagine that. From idol worship to belief in God, the God of the Old Testament, the God of the New Testament, the God of the Bible, Yahweh, the God who's made a covenant with His people that He will always provide everything that they need. She goes from outside of that to inside of that. Now she's part of it, and she becomes a major player in the history of God's redemption as He reaches out to mankind. Her name is in the book in more than one place. Imagine. If God doesn't orchestrate comebacks, and if it's not demonstrated in the life of Ruth, then we might as well just pack it up and go home. That's the proof that people are recognizing God is doing a miracle here. He's turning everything around. You didn't think it could happen, but it can. Look at Ruth. Look what she came from, and look what God is making her. You know, she was faithful to her mother-in-law. So she cared about other people. Obviously, she was generous because whatever she worked hard to get herself, which, by the way, there was great value in hard work, and no job is beneath anybody. So if you ever start to think that, forget it. That's baloney. That's not God's way. But not only all of that, when she did get a little blessing from Boaz, she took it home and she shared it with Naomi. She stuck to her, she worked hard, and she shared with her. That's the kind of person that builds a strong legacy in God's eyes. That opens the door for God to be able to do the miraculous that they're recognizing right here. Do you see that? If you're going to be stingy and only care about yourself, God's hand will remain closed. But as soon as you decide to care about somebody else and give, that opens God's hand to give to you. And that's what He's doing. That's the miracle that He's doing with Ruth. So she goes home and she became his wife. And then, when he made love to her, the Lord enabled her to conceive, and she gave birth to a son. The same God that closed her womb when she was married to Mahlon now opened her womb and gave her a son. Verse 14, and I love this part. And the women said to Naomi, They begin with praise. The women said to Naomi, "Praise be to the Lord, who has this day not left you without a guardian redeemer." And they're not talking about Boaz. They're talking about the baby. Here's a bunch of women saying, "Praise God, you got a baby after all, Naomi. You didn't think it could happen, but you got one. Look, you got a son. This thing is going to go on. Yeah, you may have made some mistakes in your past, but hey, God is bigger than your mistakes. Look what you have, Naomi. Yeah, I know Boaz. He's cool. That's good. He's Ruth. Forget about him. Look at the baby." And Naomi, she's like, "Yeah, you're right. I got a baby. This is everything." Look, when Naomi came back to town, she said, "I'm empty." It wasn't just because she didn't have a way to provide for herself. It was because she'd lost the most important people in her life. She had no hope for a future. With this son, I could capitalize that word son. With this son, we too have hope for the future. That's what these ladies are expressing here. Oh, Naomi, I can't believe it. It actually happened. Look, you have a son. And they're celebrating. They're praising God because of it. Then they offer this prayer. May he, remember, they said, hey, let Boaz be famous. Now look what they say. May he become famous throughout all Israel. And you say, wait a second, this is really not a great family? How could all of this happen, especially with a Moabite bride? I mean, how long is all of this going to take to unfold? And God would say, be patient. You see, in my law, if an Israelite marries a Moabite and they have children for 10 generations, that child, their children, their descendants are not allowed to worship in the congregation with the rest of all of Israel. They're cut off from religious community within the group, within Israel, for 10 generations. You can go ahead and marry a Moabite person, but if you do, know that your children, even up to the 10th generation, will be cut off from worshiping. Now, Ruth converted. They were to accept converts, and apparently they did within the community. They absolutely accepted her as a convert in that community. So she was. But it didn't negate God's plan. It didn't negate God's law. And we're going to see how all this unfolds in a minute. May he become famous. How long is it going to take? And the people's mind would say, well, at least 10 generations, right? But they don't care. They're so ecstatic at this moment. They recognize what has happened. God has done a miracle here, turned around the life of 2 widows, given them hope now. Now these women have joined the ranks of the other women in the town again. They're no longer outsiders. Naomi has a baby, even though it's really Ruth's baby. Doesn't matter. It's Naomi that they know best. And now they say, hey, listen, may he become famous in all of Israel. Little did they know what they were saying. And then they make this prediction. They come back down to earth for a second. They say, he will renew your life and sustain you in your old age. Not Boaz again. The baby will. Old age there really literally says gray hair. In your gray hair, may he sustain you. When you get old and you can't take care of yourself any longer, may this son take care of you. And then they make this pronouncement. For your daughter-in-law, who loves you and who is better to you than 7 sons, has given birth to him. In other words, Naomi, Ruth, who has given birth to the son who's going to take care of you when you're old, she is better to you than a net gain of 5 sons and every child that they could provide for you. She loves you. She stuck with you. Now she's given you a son. She's better than 5 sons. She's better than 5 guys. She's given you more than you can ask, even if you had 5 living sons. Can you imagine that? They recognize what Ruth has done in her generosity for Naomi. And now it's going to play out generation after generation, because now a legacy is built between 2 godly people. And you'll see the importance as the pages of Scripture unfold. And then Naomi took the child in her arms and she cared for him. She's like, Ruth, give me the baby. I'm the grandma. I don't care. Ruth is not even biologically related to this child. At least not very closely. But it doesn't matter. because cords of love have wrapped around that grandma's heart, and she is not letting that baby go. Women are the same no matter what generation you live in. She's got the baby. And the mom is glad because the mom needs a break. She's got the baby. Then the women living there said, hey, Naomi has a son. And you say, what? No, Ruth has a son. No, they're saying Naomi has a son. Some people would argue that this is really not the story of Ruth, it's the story of Naomi. It's the story of a woman who walked away from God. But she did one thing that changed everything in her life. She chose to go back to the people of God, and she chose to go back to the place where God was providing again. One choice made the difference. And everything in Naomi's life turned around because of that one choice. And that should speak to us. We're one choice from everything turning around for us, either in one direction or another. But we can never lose if we make the decision to return to the people of God in the place of God's provision, and more than that, to God himself. Naomi has a son, and they named him Obed, which, by the way, means servant. I mean, that's kind of after his mom, right? She was a servant. All through the book, she's identified as different types of servants, right? Obed. And it wasn't necessarily that the women of the city named the baby. They were identifying God is working here. And they joined with mom and dad and with the grandma and said, hey, his name is Obed. And if you're a Jewish hearer or reader for the first time, you're about to have your breath taken away. Because you're engrossed in the story, and you hear about this man and this woman that come together as a result of a Levirate marriage, a kinsman redeemer, and a pour down and outer, and they have a child, and the child's name is Obed, and they're saying, what's going on here? And then look, he was the father of Jesse. Oh no, you got to be kidding me. No, you got to be kidding me. Obed and Jesse, who was Jesse the father of? David, right? I mean, they're like, you got to be kidding me. How did this happen? God definitely orchestrated a comeback, a miracle here. I mean, Obed to Jesse to David, you got to be kidding me. And then it doesn't stop there. And we always read over these genealogies like they really don't mean anything. But I think you should stop and pay attention here, okay, for a second. Because the narrator is doing something. The editor of this story makes sure that everything is in place to fulfill God's plan in all of this, in this genealogy. Now watch this. They're all aghast now, the Jewish people. I can't believe it. I can't believe it. God has done it again. Remember what the cry of the people was when they turned their backs on God? We want a king like everybody else. And God said, no, I'll be your king. And they said, no, we want another. And finally he relented. They wanted a king like everybody else. And God said, no, I'll be your king. I'll orchestrate your history for you in the whole progress of redemption if you'll only let me. Right here is evidence that even in man's failings, he will do that. Watch this. This then is the family tree of Perez. Remember, that's the family that Boaz came from. You know, like there was Judah, and then Judah had sons, and the first son was Perez, and then somewhere down the line, Boaz came after Perez. In that line, not from another son, but from Perez. And we'll see that he's actually the seventh son. So watch this. This then is the family line of Perez. Perez was the father of Hezron. There's one. Hezron was the father of Ram. There's two. Ram was the father of Amminadab. There's three. Amminadab, here comes four, the father of Nahshon. Nahshon, here's five, the father of Salmon. Salmon, 6, is the father of Boaz, who is the seventh son, and he's the father of Obed. Obed, who is number 8, is the father of Jesse, who is number 9, and Jesse is the father of King David, who is number 10. How many generations was it going to take for the people to be able to go back and worship God with the congregation of the people to be accepted. It's the center of Jewish life. And David is the primary person who is responsible for gathering all of the materials so that the temple could be built even when he couldn't. You see, the writer is making sure that the people know that what God said and what the people proclaimed and acknowledged in this story was actually going to take place. For 10 generations, this is going to go on, and your name is going to be famous in the history, in the annals of all of Israel. And it's going to be famous not because so much of you, and not even so much because of your descendants, but because God was working behind the scenes to make things happen for you and to further His plan. You get blessed, but He gets the glory. Look, 10 generations later, the name of the most famous king of all of Israel pops up. David. I mean, it's so famous that their flag has his star on it. Anybody have a star on the American flag here? Nobody. This guy does. That's how famous he is. And it was his son that built the temple. And if you remember reading the story in the Old Testament, Solomon builds a temple, and it wasn't that impressive, actually. He spent 7 years building it, but he spent 14 years building his own palace. It became the center of worship for Israel. It was the hallmark of his career as king before he took a nosedive. The temple wasn't so great. It was the God of the temple that had orchestrated all of this to happen. And so no matter what God has done for Naomi, no matter what God has done for Ruth, no matter what God has done through Boaz, it all points to what God is doing with His people and to Jesus. You see, the narrator knew something that Boaz, Ruth, and Naomi didn't know. That the greatest king was going to come as a result of their union. And we know something that the narrator doesn't know. That from that greatest king comes the King of Kings that came to purchase our redemption. He has become our kinsman redeemer. So if you think that God doesn't care, you are wrong. God is working in your own personal history to make things happen. That one day, a Messiah would come who would be from the stump of Jesse. He would be a shoot from the stump of Jesse. David would say, he will be, in Psalm 101, my own son. And the Spirit of the Lord will rest upon him. And He will come, and He will deliver, and He will provide everything that we need, beyond what we could ever think or even imagine. The same God who brought all of that about is the same God that cares for you. Listen, no one escapes His notice. I'm going to wrap it up with this, okay? No one escapes God's notice. If He cared for two widows who couldn't provide for themselves in a way that they could have never imagined, what makes you think that He won't do it for you? No one escapes God's notice. If you're empty and you need filled, all you have to do is ask. Number 2, God's purpose in your life is to connect you with something far greater than yourself. The only person in the whole story that's not named is the person who only cared about himself, Mr. So-and-so. That's not God's plan. God's plan is that you connect. If you think about the story of Ruth and Naomi and Boaz, or if you think about your own story and what brought you here today, why wouldn't you want to connect with that? Because that will affect your legacy. You see, a legacy is at stake if you don't connect. If you don't invest. It may cost you something, but if you don't invest, you're not going to get a return. That's just God's economy. If you don't invest, you're not going to get a return. A legacy is at stake. So, if you're here, hook in to the vision, hook into what God is doing, be part, yeah, it may cost you something, but get to be a part of something that's bigger than you because a legacy is at stake. Your legacy, the legacy of our church, the legacy of this community is at stake. You may not think so, but God is doing something bigger than you can imagine. Third takeaway, God's blessing begins when we turn back to Him. And the story of Ruth demonstrates that in both ways. You see, I don't know where you're at today. Maybe you knew God at one time and maybe you've walked away from Him. That's Naomi. Maybe you never knew God and it's time for you to really, really turn your life over to Him today. Even in this setting. Maybe. That's Ruth. She didn't know God, but when she was confronted with Him, she gave her heart to Him. The story speaks to both. God's blessing comes when we return to Him. It's what guided Naomi's steps back to God. So it doesn't matter where you're at. If you want to experience the goodness and the kindness of God, you have to return to Him. You have to go to where He is. And you know where you'll find Him? At the foot of the cross, where Jesus died as our kinsman redeemer to provide you and me with everything that we need for life and godliness. Not just to give us a son, so to speak, but to purchase our salvation, to redeem us with a bride price. And that bride price was His own life. So if you think that God doesn't care, and if you don't care enough to get connected, and if you don't think enough of what Jesus has done, then walk out the door and don't come back. But if you do, come back and bring somebody with you, because a legacy is at stake. And it's bigger than you could ever think or imagine. God may just be orchestrating a comeback on your behalf. And you're so low, you don't even see it, but that's right where He wants you. Because then He gets all the glory for it. Amen? Stand with me if you would. So that's the end of the book of Ruth. And again, a little long, but hey, we got through 4 chapters in 4 weeks. That is a miracle. God must have been working behind the scenes on all of that. Let me leave you with this narration. Finally, in the end, God overcomes all obstacles to bring Naomi from emptiness to fullness, to bring Boaz from being a bachelor to being a happily married man, and to bring Ruth from being an alien widow to being a great-grandmother of Israel's greatest king. God's redemptive purposes will never be thwarted. Not then, not now, not forever. God's people one day will live happily ever after, forever, because what God has done in redeeming us. Amen? Let me pray for you. Lord, if there's someone here that has forgotten how much God really cares, or if they're doubting how much God cares, remind them today. If they're empty, let them ask, and may they be filled. God, if there is someone who's failed to commit to something bigger than themselves, may today be the day that they do that. It may cost them something, Lord, but may they commit to their church, to the people of God. And Lord, I pray for every person here who needs to either return or turn to Jesus as their kinsman redeemer, who's purchased their salvation. Lord, if they've walked away, I pray that you would bring them back and fill them up. I know they're empty. So do you. Fill them up. And Lord, if there's somebody here that just for the longest time they've been playing the game, Lord, cut through all of the words that were shared here today and go right to the heart of the matter. They need you. And may they call on your name today. And may our testimony be that your name is great in us. That your name becomes famous among everybody that we come in contact with for 10 or more generations. And then, Lord, let it explode. And let your name be glorified in all of the earth. In Jesus' name, Amen. Amen.